My name is Maureen Bala. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. You probably can tell right now, I am nervous out of my gourd. And what keeps me going in these public speaking moments is when I look out into the audience, and it's always a woman, and she's attentive, and she's sitting there, and she's nodding at me like, you got this, girl. So thank you. And it's why I'm wearing pink. Because the truth is, health advocacy, patient care is overwhelmingly women's work. It's been women who've been carrying this load. So I wanted to represent and bring some girl power up on stage. So let's hear it. Because look around who's here, right? Mentally, just do a quick question. 435. Is this number ringing any bells for anybody? Anybody want to just take a quick guess? You can shout. Don't worry about the mic. Just shout out from the audience. What do you think this is? Say it. Whoa, I don't know the answer to that. Someone said number of people in the House of Representatives. Anybody else? Somebody on this side. I'm sorry, say it louder. Pharma companies? God, you guys run deep. No, this was yesterday's lotto jackpot. And the reason I bring this up, I want you to think, take a moment, self-reflect. If you could do what are the first three things you would do if you won the lotto? If you won $435 million, think internally, what are those things? So this is an icebreaker I use all the time. And when I ask folks who work for life science manufacturers, and by life science manufacturers, I'm talking about pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, medical device companies. They will say, travel and leisure, vacation home in Tuscany, a boat. Boats are big. They'll say, you know what? I'm not going to take it safe with a, index fund. They're going to do something with the street. They're going to play with their money. They're going to invest differently. And the first time I heard that, I had to Google what an index fund was. And then third, charity. When I do this icebreaker with folks who work in clinics or folks who work directly with patients, these are the answers I get. They're going to pay off their student loans, or they're going to take care of their kids' education. That is always the number one thing. Or they're going to go back to school. They're an RN, they want to get the BSN. Or they're paying off their debt. They would have made different career choices were it not for student debt. They're going to pay off their mortgage or buy a home, help their mom with the mortgage. And then charity. And this is always really revealing to me. And I'm going to admit, and I'm wondering how many of you are doing the same, you kind of go to a judgy place. Anybody? I do. And it's this idea, it's like, wow, pharma's this really privileged place. They're only in it for the Benjamins. And we, advocates, we do God's work, right? I know, because I did a little bit of this dance. I went over to the dark side. And so the topic for the title for this talk was intentional. And I'll tell you right now, so is it selling your soul if you decide to work for pharma? I don't know. If and when I meet you in the great beyond, we'll have our answer. But I will tell you that you are the soul of pharma. You are what saves pharma's soul. The work that you do, your passion for patients, the knowledge you have is the heart, and we need you. So, any Taylor Swift fans in here? Love or hate her, you got to admire her, okay? So there's this song that made me know, it's me, hi. Everybody, let's do it. It's me, hi. I'm the problem, it's me. Okay, all right, maybe not. How we talk about ourselves matters. So I've caught myself, since I went over to the pharma side, catching myself and saying, until I sold my soul to pharma, until I went to the dark side. And I've really had to make a conscious effort to stop speaking about the work I do in that way. because ultimately the work I do does help patients, and I feel very strongly about it. Patient access is my jam. But it wasn't a straight path, and I know some of you are very interested in maybe pursuing careers with industry, so I'm going to share a little bit about how I ended up here. This is the same person, 42 years apart. That's my first communion portrait. My mom has a much more pious looking one on her piano. And the other photo was taken of me at a show like this about 6 months ago. My family is Irish. I have a company called Galway Group. We have a booth out on the floor. You might have noticed the relaxation zone with the massage therapist. That's where we are. Please feel free to come by and say hi afterwards. I love talking with folks. And it's not a straight path. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my family, my education, work, and life choices that brought me into patient support services. But like I said, it's not a straight path. It's knotted, it's twisted. I might have gotten off track. And I think everybody in this room has a story that it's not going to look like mine, but it may have all the same contours and twists and occasional knots. So in my late 20s, I had my heart thoroughly broken, pretty much knocked out of my chest. I was doing something completely different. And I thought, what am I doing with my life? And I had this idea, well, maybe I'll become a nurse. Maybe I'll go back to school. So I worked in a hospital for 6 months as a research assistant at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And I was a research assistant. I was a medical assistant. I downloaded glucometers. I vitalized patients. Asked them to hop up on the scale. And what I learned working at the Brigham was that brilliant physicians can be professional, kind, and collaborative. And they spoiled me there because they set a very high bar for my expectation about physician-team interactions. I know that I heard some chuckles, right? So I had the great pleasure, it was an all-female physician team. It was the program for diabetes and pregnancy, and they are outstanding, just the best. And they treated me like a colleague. And I learned so much. And one of the physicians who at the time was a mentor to me, she's like, you're fabulous, but you need to get some letters after your name. It took me 10 years to get my undergrad degree, all right? I worked my way through school. I did not want to go back. I had some girlfriends who were living out west, and they said, sweetie, we don't know what you're going to do, but I was still licking my paws from that other thing. They said, move out here. We'll help you. So I moved out to Los Angeles, and this is like something out of a movie, but I became an inner city school teacher in a Title I school in Los Angeles on an emergency teaching credential. I taught science and health to 7th and 8th grade at the 6th largest middle school in LA. So at any given time, there were more than 3,000 kids on campus. I loved it. It was the best 3 years of my life. It was. I used to come in, I remember there'd be some mornings, not every morning, but I'd come in with about 10 pounds of bananas, and the principal would see me signing in. And like, Miss Dolan, or Dolan's my maiden name. Oh, are you teaching nutrition? And I'd be like, nope. Some of you will get it. Those kids were funny. They were interesting. They so badly wanted to learn. I mean that sincerely. There's no part of me. I laughed every day. I cried about once a week, but I laughed every day. And teaching is what got me interested in public health. One of my students had to have a disfiguring surgery that saved her life ultimately. But what had happened was she had a dental carie, a cavity that went too far, and she developed an infection in her jaw. Her parents hadn't been able to take her to a dentist. And when I tell people this story, they go, oh, was she undocumented? No, U.S. citizen, born in LA. At the time, there was a 9-month wait list to get in to see a pediatric dentist who took Denti-Cal. And that is the reality. You got your dental care when you went to the ER, and at that point for her, it was too late. They were lucky that they saved her jaw, let alone the tooth. And that's what got me interested in access to care. So I'd established California residency. I threw my hat into the ring. And then I went to UCLA, where I earned a graduate degree in public health. And I got to speak to some MPH students last night. Holla. I don't love being in school. I don't. It's hard. Like, I was schlepping. Two amazing opportunities have presented themselves. One, I was self-funding myself, right? It's either financial aid or I'm working, substitute teaching. I was very lucky to receive a menteeship in the Bixby program. So I worked in women's health, and that included family planning and abortion. And that was my introduction to access in the US. So I worked in the OB-GYN clinic, I counseled patients, I scheduled procedures, and I also worked on research related to contraceptive choice post-abortion. And the other thing that happened by virtue of that work is that someone asked me if I'd be interested in sitting on a committee with LA Care Health Plan, with the Pediatric Advisory Committee, Health Advisory Committee. I'm just gonna be honest, I was a fly on the wall. I don't want to overstate my involvement in that, but to be sitting there listening to leaders in the field discuss utilization, access, how to serve 1 million children in Los Angeles was formative in my understanding of health plan policy, payer policy, as both a regulator and a payer in the healthcare system. And then from there, I graduated, and I knew somebody who knew somebody, and they were like, move up to San Francisco. I was like, yeah, sure. So I did. And I was a practice manager for years. How many folks now are either working in practices or working in hospitals directly? I'm just curious. Okay, you are my people. All right. And things I've learned as a health practice manager, with all due respect to the physicians in the room, you are probably the notable exception. Most physicians do not understand the dynamics of managed care and reimbursement. I don't know that they should. They've just spent their lifetime in school. I really want them to be at the top of their game, right, if they're taking my appendix out. Right, but that's not their expertise. And you would hope that the dollars would not be driving their clinical decision making. Unfortunately, sometimes there are very hard discussions you have to have with patients. And I know a lot of the people in this room have had that experience, and I know I have as well. And then a funny thing happened while I was working in hospitals. So I picked up C. diff. Anybody ever had C. diff? All right, I picked up a humdinger. I picked up drug-resistant C. diff. I was working in the hospital. They say community acquired. I wasn't on antibiotics at the time. It's just one of those bad streak of luck. Like really bad streak of luck, like ICU, went into organ failure, ended up on dialysis kind of streak of luck. And a funny thing happened while all that was going on. I had thrown my hat into the ring, applied cold online to a local pharma company, and they called me while I was out on medical leave going through dialysis. And they said, would you be interested in speaking to us about patient support? And honestly, it was a total of 11 interviews and 2 dinners. There's no way I could have had the time to do it if I was working. Like, how would I have gotten out of the clinic? So they didn't know it. I didn't tell them that I was sick as a dog, and I was like hoping, like I played with my eyeshadow so they wouldn't notice the jaundice. I'm serious. I'm completely serious. And I ended up working for a company named Genentech, and I was a program manager in their PAP and with Access Solutions. And I realized so many things. See if I can do that. I remember the first time we had a big get together, and I had already offered, like, do you guys collect for the coffee club? And they were like, what, sweetheart, we have this. Is that more than one thing can be true at the same time. So that's where you get the devil and the angel. But if you've worked in clinics, you also know that's true there. If you've worked in hospital settings, if you've worked with medical groups, you know, more than one thing can be true at the same time. And you have to learn to live with that discomfort and how to negotiate it. Now, if you remember the little girl in the First Communion photo, right? Remember that? So my mom is from County Galway, Ireland. She gets on her knees every night to say the rosary, still does. My dad was more of a philosophical Catholic. And while I'm not a practicing Catholic myself, I am so profoundly grateful for the lessons my family taught me. And I'm going to share a few of them as they relate to faith. So one is that women often must, out of necessity, lead, and that they have responsibility, even if they're not given authority or title. That's women doing the work. The second, was that there's power in word, whether it's the spoken word or the written word. The third is that there's beauty in pageantry and ritual. Fourth, I think is kind of obvious, regardless of if you come from a faith tradition or no faith tradition at all, is a moral imperative to serve the poor and the sick. And then the fifth is to do good, to try to do good even in a system that's inherently flawed. And I couldn't help but feel when I joined pharma, and I'll be honest, my salary doubled when I went into pharma. It did. I was 40, right? I had had a whole life career. It was the first time I could make a meaningful dent in my student loans. And people don't like to talk about the money thing, and it feels crunchy and gross and whatever. I was the first in my family to graduate, in my immediate family to graduate from college. I have a blue collar background. My parents gave me everything they could, but still, it was like, oh, this place is different. And I felt kind of dirty. Like it kind of bothered me. Didn't bother me so much I didn't take the check, but it bothered me. Like I was like, how do I reconcile this? Right? And so when I said earlier, like, I don't know if it's selling your soul to go to pharma, but I do believe the people in this room are that soul. I mean that sincerely. They need the voice of the patient. They need also translation. You have to understand the vulnerability and the trust that patients are placing in the manufacturers and even in these wonderful organizations that are providing charitable assistance. Right? No patient wants to participate in real-world evidence. You know, you sign forms allowing access for HIPAA authorization or PHI access. That does not give you carte blanche, right? There's this idea of stewardship. And I know everybody in this room knows that fundamentally and will protect that. So in terms of the work I do, I'm going to talk a little bit about patient support programs. So I shared that I work at Genentech. From Genentech, I went to a company called Amgen, where I managed and developed patient support programs and was privileged to work on a couple launch products as well. So new therapies, what are going to be the challenges for patients to access these therapies? So I'm going to talk you through some of the rationale and how manufacturers think about this. Their goal is that patients can initiate treatment right away and follow their HCP's directions. Right? That makes sense. Okay. What does success look like? 0 patient backlog. So when a patient initiates therapy is dependent on the patient's clinical status and their prescriber's decision making. Not any hang up with insurance, not the logistical barriers. And also a goal is increased adherence. That patients who participate in these programs are more likely to start and stay on therapy. And the strategy is to educate patients and prescribers and then reduce patient financial barriers to care. So that's your why. I can talk a little bit about the whole structure. I had this whole org chart thing, and I was like, let me make it a little simpler. Market access. So I didn't know anything about pharma really before I joined it. Like I was kind of a red herring hire for them. If you're thinking about joining pharma or you're curious about the opportunities, believe it or not, you would fall probably under the commercial organization, and within that, a group called market access. And there's going to be a lot here. I'm happy to talk folks through this out at the booth outside. But you've got your payer evidence. That's your health economics, your clinical story. You have your pricing and contract strategy folks, your coverage and reimbursement. So now the light blue is kind of, these are my peeps. So you've got medical pharmacy benefits, prior authorizations. These are folks talking plans, co-insurance, co-payments, formulary tier status, negotiating with the plans. You have your distribution. So it's like third-party logistics, wholesalers, GPO, IDN. And then access support. So helping patients navigate what is a complex system. Patient and HCP education and financial assistance. I think almost everybody in this room is going to know that far right column. Yes? No? Can I get a gut check? Okay. That's the who. That's the who's working on that. Here are 4 key elements that you'll see, right? Insurance coverage and reimbursement. So that's what we call the hub. These are sponsored by manufacturers. Your field reimbursement teams, your FRADs, your FRMs, those are ones who cozy up to you. Like, hey, right? But they also provide tremendous information about your local plan coverage. E-services referrals, this has not delivered on the promise. Remember 2008? I don't know if any of you, I've been on when I was in the clinics, 3 different EMR implementations. I have the battle scars from that, and everyone was like, meaningful use. And it's like, I gave up smoking many, many years ago, but honest to God, I could have rolled my own cigarette at the end of one EHR implementation. Like, mercy, right? But e-services, whether we're talking about referral to these programs via Epic, via the EHR, or a web portal, and also manufacturers are very interested in how you can leverage technology to drive efficiencies. Supplemental patient education. By what I mean by that is not any kind of co-management. I want to be very clear on that. We're talking about live, real-time interactions, usually between an RN or a patient educator and a patient via the telephone or a web. Supplemental. Commercial copay assistance. These are your copay cards. So the development of these programs, the benefit, the annual cap, that's what folks in pharma are working on, at least in the market access, right? The business rules defining the enrollment pathway, who's going to be eligible, how can we do this compliantly and still be following within the rules of OIG compliance. And then finally, free products. So that's your patient assistance programs, Quick Start, Auto Start, Bridge, and a lot of times it's working with a non-commercial dispensing pharmacy. So that's a lot. And here are some table stakes, or at least how I consider it, when you're working in patient support programs. You need an enrollment. I want to apologize now for the past and also in the future for the enrollment forms that patients have to fill out. And I know many of you have worked trying to decipher that. And when somebody said earlier, a lot of these issues are legal, absolutely. People are like, could you please put the form to one, could you just have it be one page? I wish. I'll ask. So we know that that is not an intuitive process. It's something my teammates and I look at constantly. How can we do this so that we make sure that patients are fully informed, that we understand data and what is being given privilege or access to, but also how can we put this in human language that's understandable. Patient education. Patients need to understand their therapies, and they also need to know what their out-of-pocket costs will be or what their responsibilities will be, and are there resources available to help them. Patients need effective financial assistance and free goods programs. Somebody put it very well. If the patient can't access the medicine, if they can't afford it, they're not going to start it. And then also, and this is the part where I just have to acknowledge, hello, we're in the US. These are many times private industries, private corporations. There's this idea of what I'll call capital efficiency, and that's stewardship of the company's resources. That's the how. So the why, the who, the what, the how, we've gone over that. Where do you fit in? So for those of you who are looking for the buzzwords or who kind of want to understand maybe how your strengths would dovetail with needs in industry, how many of you work with physicians? Raise them proud. Okay, you know how to influence without authority. If you've ever had to negotiate with an MD about their time in an office, right, or act on behalf of an MA or negotiate, you know how to influence without authority, and you have organizational savvy, and there is value in that. You have a practical understanding of the government as regulator and payer. Do you have Medicare patients in your clinic? Medicaid? Yeah. You have a deep knowledge of both payer policy and health plan operations. I had a funny conversation with a client about 2 months ago, and it was new product launch, things are going along, EHR integration, yada, yada, yada. And she's like, yeah, but we're hearing from one of the clinics that there's a requirement, there's this thing, they need to fax it. And she was getting a little kind of crunchy about it. I'm like, what is it they need? She's like, I don't know, we're gonna have to do a training. Apparently the patient demographics, and I'm like, are you talking about the face sheet? And she's like, tell me about this face sheet. I could give you a million encounter forms. And these may seem like very tactical or administrative, but you have a skill set. How many of you are coders? All right, don't underestimate or devalue the knowledge that you have. And whether you decide or not to participate in industry, just even in your own work, even if you stay on the career path you're on now, like own it, sister. You understand prescriber engagement and also patient activation. You can speak to why patients do not or do start and stay on therapy. And I'm just going to encourage you all to be proud of it all. Nothing that you do, nothing that anyone in this room does for patients is small. And I would also offer that industry needs your talent, your passion, and your experience. So, thank you for your time. I kind of glossed over like my current Genie gig. So after Amgen, I went to a small biotech. I worked on that on a product launch. And after that, I'm a mom of a young child. He's 6. This is an axolotl for anybody who's been curious about what the critter is. This is if you are in first grade or kindergarten, these guys are hot. And I started my own consulting firm, and I work with 2 cool, kick-ass women. Our clients tend to be pharma and life science manufacturers. And this is what we do, just patient support. No sales, no marketing, no branding. We're about access. And I love it. I love it. So for those of you who have hung out your own shingle as patient advocates, for people who are thinking about transitioning to industry, or who just want to ask questions, I'm going to be available in the booth all day. And I thank you so much for your time and your attention.